The distress call screamed through the void, desperate and terrified. 30,000 innocent lives. 7 enemy warships. 0 help coming. Every civilized species in the galaxy heard the call. Every military force ran the calculations. Every commander reached the same conclusion. Impossible odds, unwinnable battle, certain death. The Galactic Council refused. Too dangerous. Too far. Too expensive. But there was one species they hadn't asked yet. One species the galaxy preferred to keep at arm's length. A species that evolved on a world so hostile, so brutal, that most aliens classified it as uninhabitable. A death world. The humans. No one wanted to call them. Humans were unpredictable, aggressive, and utterly insane by galactic standards. They came from a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill them, and somehow they thrived. They fought wars against each other for thousands of years before unifying. They refused to quit even when quitting was the logical choice. But 30,000 lives were about to be sold into slavery, and there was no one else left to ask. The message was sent to Earth with a single desperate hope. Maybe the Death Worlders would do what no civilized species dared. What happened next would change the galaxy forever. Commander Vextel's hands trembled as he played the transmission for the 3rd time. 20 years at the Galactic Council monitoring station, and he'd never heard anything like this. The voice belonged to Illyrian, a species known for philosophy and art, not warfare. They were peaceful people who spent their days creating beauty and contemplating existence. They didn't scream, but this one was screaming. Through the static, Vextel could hear it clearly now. The Lyrian colony on Exodus 7 was under attack. The Kroth Dominion had arrived with 7 massive warships. Ground forces were rounding up every Lyrian on the planet. 30,000 souls, herding them into camps like animals. The Kroth were taking them as slaves. Vextel's junior officer, Pelman, burst into the command center, his face pale. "Sir, I've confirmed the visual data. 7 Kroth warships in orbit. Their ground forces are... They're not just capturing them, sir. They're beating anyone who resists. The children..." Vextel closed his eyes. He didn't need to hear more. He opened emergency channels to every major military force in the galaxy. The Centaurian fleet 3 weeks away and too small to engage the Kroth. The Valoran Armada, engaged in border disputes on the opposite side of known space. The Meridian forces, peacekeepers not warriors, utterly unprepared for combat against an enemy like the Kroth. Species after species gave him the same answer. Too far. Too weak. Too afraid. The Kroth weren't like other species. They came from a world of endless warfare where only the strong survived. Their warriors stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that could deflect most weapons. They'd conquered 17 civilizations in the last 50 years. When the Kroth attacked, entire species either submitted or died. Vextel sat at his desk and put his head in his hands. 30,000 Lyrians were about to disappear into a nightmare of slavery and suffering, and no one in the civilized galaxy would lift a finger to stop it. That's when Pelman spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there is one species we haven't contacted." Vextel looked up sharply. "Who?" "The humans." The word hung in the air like a curse. Humans had joined the Galactic Council only 5 years ago, and in that time they'd made everyone nervous. Their planet Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world. Most species evolved on gentle worlds with abundant resources and mild weather. Humans evolved on a planet that was actively hostile to life. They'd survived ice ages that should have killed them, diseases that would wipe out any normal species, predators that outweighed them 10 to 1. And somehow, impossibly, they thrived. The stories spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humans could endure injuries that would kill most species. Their immune systems fought off diseases that hospitalized aliens for months. They healed from wounds that should have been fatal. Their bodies were built for a high-gravity world, making them stronger than they looked. But what really frightened the other species was the human capacity for violence. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other, wars that killed millions, conflicts that spanned continents, battles that lasted generations. They understood warfare in ways peaceful species couldn't comprehend. When humans fought, they fought with a fury that seemed primal and unstoppable. Most council members kept humans at a distance. They were useful for dangerous tasks, but no one wanted to get too close to a species that seemed to enjoy conflict. "They'll refuse," Vexthal said quietly. "Why would humans risk their lives for people they've never met?" "Because," Pellman replied, pulling up data on his screen. "According to their history, that's what they do. Earth's archives are full of stories about soldiers who died protecting strangers. They call it sacrifice. It seems to be culturally important to them." Vexthal stared at the screen showing the Exodus 7 system. The Kroth ships maintained their blockade. On the surface, the holding camps grew larger. Time was running out. "Send the message," Vexthal said. "Include everything, the Kroth force strength, the location, the time we have left. And Pellman, include images of the Lyrian people, their culture, their children. I want the humans to see exactly who they'd be saving." The transmission was prepared with trembling hands. It painted a picture of hopelessness. 30,000 innocents, 7 enemy warships, 0 friendly forces available. The message ended with a simple statement: "Humanity, you are our last hope. The Galactic Council has no one else to send. Will you answer?" The message shot across the void at faster than light speeds, reaching Earth's orbital station in seconds. Vexthal waited, watching his screens. He watched the Kroth ships circle their prey. He watched more Lyrians being forced into the camps. He watched hope dying. An hour passed. Then the console beeped. A message from Earth. Vexthal opened it with shaking hands. It was short, written in the efficient military style that humans seemed to prefer. From someone named Admiral Jack Harrison, commander of the Terran Defense Fleet. Distress call received. Situation understood. Response fleet departing immediately. ETA to Exodus 7. 72 hours. Stand by. We are coming. Vexthal read it 3 times to be sure he understood correctly. The humans were actually going to fight the Kroth. They were going to travel 3 days across space to defend people they'd never met, against an enemy that had never been defeated. Pellman began forwarding the message to other council members. Vexthal could already imagine their reactions. Some would be grateful. Others would be horrified. Many would question whether humanity had the authority. But none of that mattered now. Help was coming. The Death Worlders were coming. And somewhere on Exodus 7, 30,000 Lyrians were about to discover what happened when you became important to a species that refused to quit. Admiral Jack Harrison stood in the command center of the Terran Gateway, staring at the message that would change everything. 53 years old, gray-haired, with a face weathered by decades of military service. He'd fought in the Unification Wars when Earth's nations finally came together. He'd seen enough combat for several lifetimes. He'd hoped those days were behind him. The door opened and his senior staff filed in. Captain Lisa Morgan arrived first, commander of the battleship Valiant Dawn, mid-30s, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Commander Greg Powell followed, fleet's chief strategist, calm and analytical, already reviewing tactical data on his tablet. Harrison laid out the facts with military precision. Lyrian colony under attack. 30,000 civilians about to become slaves. 7 Kroth warships. No other species willing to help. "Do we have authorization from the Council?" Morgan asked. Harrison shook his head. "Earth has provisional membership. We're technically observers. We have no formal authority to conduct military operations. Getting approval could take weeks," Powell added, studying his data. "The Lyrians don't have weeks." Harrison walked to the window overlooking Earth. The blue planet turned slowly below, peaceful and beautiful. He thought about the people down there, unaware that their military was about to make a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. He joined the military for one reason: to protect people. That was the point. When someone called for help, you answered. It didn't matter if they were human or alien. It didn't matter if you had permission from some council. 30,000 innocent people were about to suffer, and Earth had the power to stop it. "We deploy immediately," Harrison said. 5 destroyers for speed and firepower. 2 heavy cruisers for staying power. The Valiant Dawn as flagship. Launch in 6 hours. Morgan smiled. This was why she joined the fleet. Powell nodded, already calculating supply requirements. Within minutes, the command center exploded with activity. Orders went out across the Terran Gateway and into military stations throughout the solar system. Ship captains received deployment notices. Marines assembled their units. Engineers began pre-flight checks. Lieutenant Danny Cooper was in the barracks when the call came. 24 years old, from Texas, joined the Marines to see the galaxy. Now he was about to see combat against an enemy no one else would fight. He recorded a message to his family. Told them he was being deployed to help people who needed it. Didn't mention the danger. Just said this was what he'd trained for. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Pilots checked fighters. Weapons officers loaded ammunition. Medical teams prepared trauma centers. Everyone knew what was coming. Captain Morgan walked through the hangar bay of the Valiant Dawn, stopping to talk with young ensigns and veteran sergeants. She reminded them why they were going. Not because some council ordered it. Not for politics or territory. They were going because people needed help, and humanity had never been good at walking away from people in trouble. Commander Powell worked with the navigation team, plotting the fastest route to Exodus 7. They'd push the engines hard, 3 days to cover a distance that would take most species a week. Harrison sent a final message to the Galactic Council. Brief and professional. He didn't ask permission, didn't apologize, simply stated what was going to happen. The message reached the council chambers in seconds. Vexthal watched the other representatives react. Some grateful, others shocked that humans would dare act without approval. A few terrified, realizing humanity was more militarily capable than anyone had estimated. One representative stood and demanded the humans be ordered to stand down. This wasn't their fight. Vexthal listened to the debate with growing frustration. These people argued about procedure while Lyrians were being enslaved. Back at the Terran Gateway, the fleet assembled. Ships detached from docking stations and moved into formation. The Valiant Dawn took the lead, her armor gleaming. Destroyers flanked her. Cruisers formed the rear guard. Harrison watched from the observation deck. Not the largest force humanity could field, but fast and deadly. More importantly, every person in that fleet was there by choice. They'd all volunteered, knowing they might not return. The final countdown began. All systems green. Navigation confirmed. Weapons ready. Medical teams standing by. Morgan stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, hands resting on the command console. She looked at her crew's faces, seeing determination and courage. They were about to jump into a situation where they were outnumbered and outgunned. Going to fight an enemy that had never been defeated. For people they'd never met. The order came from Harrison. All ships, prepare to jump. The fleet vanished in a flash of blue light, racing across the galaxy toward Exodus 7. Behind them, Earth continued turning, unaware that its children were about to announce humanity's presence in the most dramatic way possible. And on Exodus 7, 30,000 Lyrians huddled in camps, not knowing that help was coming from a species they'd never heard of. The Death Worlders were on their way. The human fleet dropped out of slipspace at the edge of the Exodus 7 system. Sensors immediately lit up with warnings. 7 Kroth warships. Massive. Threatening. Forming a blockade around the planet. Captain Morgan stood on the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, studying the tactical display with calm eyes. She'd spent 3 days learning everything about the Kroth. Their tactics. Their weaknesses. Now it was time. A transmission came through audio only. The voice was deep and arrogant. Warlord Draxus, commander of the Kroth forces. He demanded to know who dared enter his territory. Morgan opened the channel. Her response was simple and direct. Release the Lyrians and leave the system. Draxus laughed. A harsh, mocking sound. 7 warships against a small fleet. No contest. He ordered the humans to leave or be destroyed. Morgan closed the channel without another word. looked at her tactical officer. Execute attack pattern Alpha. The human fleet split into 3 groups and began moving at speeds that shocked the Croth. Human ships were smaller but fast and agile. Destroyers spread out, surrounding the enemy from multiple angles. Commander Powell coordinated from the tactical center, his screens showing dozens of data points. Years of training prepared him for this moment. The first shots came from human destroyers, railgun rounds that moved at incredible speeds, slamming into Croth shields. The shields held, but the impacts made the massive ships shudder. Draxus ordered return fire. Plasma cannons erupted, sending superheated bolts toward the human fleet. But the human ships were already moving, dodging and weaving with precision that seemed impossible. One plasma bolt caught a destroyer. The shields absorbed most of it, but armor glowed red-hot. The ship kept fighting. Morgan ordered fighter squadrons to launch. Hundreds of small craft poured out, filling space like a swarm of angry insects. Lieutenant Amy Chun led her squadron in a diving attack. Her fighters screamed through space, dodging defensive fire with movements that would have knocked out most species. Humans could handle higher G-forces than almost any known species. Their Death World bodies were built for it. Amy's squadron targeted shield generators on a Croth cruiser. Missiles struck in perfect sequence, overwhelming defenses. The shields flickered and died. Powell saw the opening immediately, ordered 2 destroyers to concentrate fire. Railgun rounds tore into exposed hull, punching through armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. Atmosphere vented into space. Internal explosions rippled across the vessel. Draxus watched in growing anger. He couldn't understand how they moved so fast, how they coordinated so perfectly. He wasn't entirely wrong. Humans had spent millennia fighting each other before reaching the stars. They understood war in ways peaceful species never could. Morgan saw 2 Croth destroyers moving to flank the Valiant Dawn. Instead of retreating, she did something that should have been suicide. She ordered her ship to charge directly between them, straight into the crossfire. The tactical officer looked shocked, but Morgan's face was calm. She knew exactly what she was doing. The Valiant Dawn accelerated toward the gap. Plasma fire hammered from both sides. Shields flared and collapsed. Armor began to glow and melt. But the Valiant Dawn kept going. As she passed between the 2 enemy ships, her weapons fired at point-blank range. Missiles and railgun rounds slammed into both targets simultaneously. At this distance, shields meant nothing. The damage was catastrophic. One Croth destroyer lost power to its engines and began drifting. The other took a direct hit to its bridge. The entire command section exploded. On the surface, Marine Commander Sam Rodriguez prepared for his part of the operation. 200 Marines in powered armor waited in drop pods. Rodriguez gave the order. The pods launched, plunging toward the planet. They heated up, hitting atmosphere, glowing like falling stars. Inside, Marines checked weapons one final time. The pods slammed into the ground near the largest holding camp. Doors blew open with explosive charges, and Marines poured out. Croth ground forces turned to face the threat. These humans were small, barely 6 feet tall, but they moved in their powered armor like hunters, fast and coordinated. When the first shots were fired, the Croth learned a hard lesson. Humans knew how to fight on the ground. They'd been doing it for thousands of years. Lieutenant Danny Cooper was at the front. He saw a Croth warrior raising a weapon toward Lyrian civilians. Danny's rifle came up in a smooth motion. He fired. The round crossed 200 meters in an instant, struck the warrior in the head. The alien fell without a sound. Marines spread across the camp, engaging Croth forces wherever they found them. The battle was fierce but one-sided. The Croth had expected easy victims, not trained soldiers who refused to stop advancing. Rodriguez led a squad toward the command center. A Croth officer stood in the doorway, holding a weapon to a Lyrian child's head. The officer shouted that Rodriguez should surrender or the child would die. Rodriguez didn't negotiate. His rifle was already aimed. He fired once. The Croth officer collapsed. The child ran to safety, crying but alive. Above in orbit, the space battle continued. 3 Kroth ships destroyed or disabled. The remaining 4 beginning to realize they were losing. This shouldn't have been possible. The Kroth had conquered 17 species. They were the strongest warriors in the galaxy. But they'd never fought humans before. And humans had one quality that terrified every species. They absolutely refused to quit. The Valiant Dawn shook as another plasma bolt struck forward shields. Captain Morgan gripped the command console, watching damage reports scroll across her screen. 3 decks had lost atmosphere. The port weapons array was offline. Casualties mounting. But Morgan didn't consider retreating. She'd seen the Lyrian children in the intelligence reports. Read about their peaceful culture. Those people were depending on humanity. Retreat was not an option. Warlord Draxus realized he was facing something unprecedented. His remaining 4 warships focused all fire on the human flagship. If he could destroy their command ship, perhaps the others would flee. It was a reasonable assumption. Most species broke when their leader fell. Humans were not most species. Concentrated fire hammered the Valiant Dawn mercilessly. Shields collapsed. Armor began to melt and peel away. Internal explosions rocked the ship as power conduits overloaded. Morgan ordered non-essential crew to emergency shelters. But she and her bridge crew remained at their posts. Admiral Harrison watched from millions of miles away. He saw the Valiant Dawn taking devastating damage. He prepared the order for tactical withdrawal. Then something happened no one expected. The Lyrians fought back. On the surface, the rescued colonists didn't run to safety. Instead, they picked up tools, rocks, anything they could use as weapons. They turned on their captors with fury born from days of fear and humiliation. The peaceful philosophers became desperate defenders of their home. Lyrian engineers sabotaged Kroth vehicles, causing explosions that destroyed entire transport columns. Lyrian workers created barricades to help human marines. They threw themselves at armed warriors with nothing but improvised weapons and determination. They'd seen humanity risk everything to save them. They wouldn't stand idle while their rescuers died. Danny Cooper watched a Lyrian elder, too old to fight effectively, throw himself at a Kroth warrior to protect children. The old Lyrian was struck down, but the distraction allowed Danny to take the shot. The warrior fell. The children escaped. Danny helped the injured elder to his feet. The old Lyrian looked at him with tears streaming and spoke in broken universal language. He thanked the humans for reminding his people what courage looked like. In orbit, Commander Powell saw an opportunity. One damaged Kroth cruiser had lost power to its engines. The massive ship drifted, unable to maneuver. Powell contacted the destroyer Freedom's Call and issued rapid commands. The Freedom's Call turned toward the crippled vessel and accelerated to maximum speed. At the last moment, the destroyer released every torpedo at point-blank range. 20 warheads struck in perfect sequence. The destroyer veered away, engines screaming. The explosions were catastrophic. The Kroth cruiser broke apart. Debris scattered across the battlefield, striking 2 other enemy ships. Warlord Draxus felt something he'd never experienced. Doubt. These humans should have broken by now. Their flagship was crippled. They were outnumbered. Yet they kept fighting with intensity that defied all logic. He watched human boarding parties breach his own flagship. Marines in powered armor poured through corridors with terrifying efficiency. Kroth warriors were larger and stronger than humans. In hand-to-hand combat, they should have dominated. But human-powered armor evened the physical advantages. And the humans fought with viciousness that seemed primal and unstoppable. Danny was part of the boarding team. His squad moved through corridors, clearing room after room. They encountered heavy resistance near a command center. Danny didn't wait for a careful plan. He charged forward, drawing enemy fire. Plasma bolts burned through his armor shields, scorched the metal underneath. He felt heat searing his skin, smelled his own flesh burning. But he kept moving, kept firing, kept advancing. His squadmates used the distraction to flank the Kroth position. Within seconds, the battle was over. Danny collapsed against a wall, his armor displaying critical damage warnings. The medic rushed to his side. Danny waved him off. They had a job to finish. On the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, Morgan received a damage report that should have ended the fight. Main power at 30%. Shields gone. Weapons limited. Life support failing on 6 decks. Morgan looked at her tactical officer. "Can we still fight?" The officer nodded. The ship was badly damaged, but she wasn't dead yet. Morgan smiled grimly. All remaining weapons target the nearest Croth vessel. The crippled flagship unleashed everything she had left. Railgun rounds and missiles streaked across space, slamming into the enemy destroyer with concentrated fury. The Croth ship's shields flickered and failed. Armor cracked and split. Atmosphere vented into the void. Draxus watched his fleet crumbling. 3 ships destroyed, 2 heavily damaged. And these humans showed no sign of stopping. He thought about his career, the 17 species he'd conquered. None had fought like this. None had been willing to die rather than surrender. He opened a direct channel to the human flagship. Morgan's face appeared, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, uniform torn and stained, but eyes clear and determined. Draxus spoke in universal language. He told Morgan he'd never seen warriors like her people. He asked what drove them to fight so hard for strangers. Morgan's answer was simple. Because someone needed help. Because it was the right thing to do. Because humanity learned long ago that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak. Draxus stared in silence. In his culture, strength was used to dominate. The weak served the strong. But these humans believed something different. They used strength to protect others. For the first time in his life, Draxus questioned everything he'd been taught. Morgan gave him one final chance. Withdraw your forces and leave the system. The Lyrians are under human protection now. If you stay, you'll all die. She said it calmly, without anger, simply a statement of fact. Draxus looked at his tactical display. His fleet was shattered. The humans were damaged but still fighting. On the surface, his ground forces were being overrun by Marines and enraged Lyrians. He had 2 choices. Continue fighting and lose everything, or retreat and live to fight another day. For a warrior who'd never retreated, the decision was agony. But Draxus was practical. He'd lost this battle. There was no shame in admitting defeat to an enemy this capable. He gave the order, all Croth ships, disengage and retreat. Ground forces, surrender to human command. The Croth fleet turned and moved toward the system's edge. Within minutes, they vanished into slipspace. The Battle of Exodus 7 was over. Humanity had won. The silence after battle was profound. For several minutes, no one on the human ship spoke. They'd won, but the cost had been high. The Valiant Dawn drifted in orbit, engines offline, hull scarred and burned. 2 destroyers had taken critical damage. 17 humans had died. Dozens more wounded. Captain Morgan sat in her command chair, looking at casualty reports. Each name represented someone who'd volunteered for this mission. Someone who'd chosen to risk everything to save strangers. She would remember every name for the rest of her life. On the surface, Marine Commander Rodriguez supervised the surrender of Croth ground forces. The alien warriors knelt in rows, weapons piled nearby. They looked confused and shocked. Many had never surrendered before. Rodriguez walked among them, ensuring prisoners were treated properly. Some Marines wanted revenge for fallen comrades. Rodriguez understood, but wouldn't allow it. The fighting was over. These were prisoners deserving proper treatment. One captured Croth warrior asked Rodriguez why humans were helping them. They were enemies. Why weren't the humans executing them? Rodriguez explained that humans fought when necessary, but didn't believe in killing helpless prisoners. Just because someone was your enemy in battle didn't mean you let them die when the battle ended. The Croth warrior seemed unable to comprehend this. The Lyrian colonists emerged from hiding as the last Croth forces were secured. 30,000 people slowly came out, looking at the sky where human ships drifted in orbit. They'd been saved. The nightmare was over. Elder Tomlos, leader of the colony, approached the human command post. The old Lyrian was crying, overwhelmed. He'd thought his people were doomed. Watched children dragged to camps. Prepared himself for slavery. Instead, strangers from across the galaxy had come to save them. Strangers who fought and bled and died for people they'd never met. Tomlas knelt before Rodriguez and tried to express gratitude in broken universal language. Rodriguez helped him stand, told him humans didn't require gratitude. They'd done what needed to be done. But Tomlas shook his head. No one else had done the same. The entire Galactic Council had refused. Dozens of species turned away. Only humanity answered the call. Danny Cooper sat in a medical tent receiving treatment for burns. The pain was intense, but he was alive. He watched medics treating both Marines and captured Croth warriors side by side. The human doctors didn't care that the Croth had been trying to kill them an hour ago. A wounded person needed help. That was all that mattered. A Croth prisoner in the next bed stared at Danny in confusion. Asked why humans were healing their enemies. Danny thought about it, then gave the only answer that made sense. Just because we fought doesn't mean we want anyone to suffer. Above the planet, repair crews worked frantically on damaged ships. The Valiant Dawn needed extensive repairs before she could jump back to Earth. Engineers sealed hull breaches, rerouted power systems, cleared debris. It would take days before the ship was spaceworthy again. Morgan walked through damaged sections, talking to her crew, thanking them for their courage. Many were exhausted, covered in soot and blood, but they smiled when they saw her. They'd done the impossible, defeated the Croth. Commander Powell sent detailed reports back to Admiral Harrison. The reports included tactical analysis, casualty figures, damage assessments. But they also included something else. Stories of Lyrian civilians fighting alongside Marines. Accounts of enemies becoming prisoners who questioned everything they believed. Evidence that humanity's actions had changed more than just this battle. 3 weeks later, the battered fleet limped back into Earth's solar system. Ships were scarred and damaged, but intact. Every human who survived was coming home. The Terran Gateway prepared a reception unlike anything in Earth's history. Millions watched as the fleet approached. The Valiant Dawn led the formation, her hull still showing burns and impacts. She looked like she'd been through hell. She had. Admiral Harrison waited at the docking bay. When Morgan stepped through the airlock, the entire station erupted in applause. Harrison saluted her formally, told her she and her crew had changed everything. Humanity was no longer unknown on the edges of galactic civilization. They were now recognized as protectors, as warriors, as people who would stand up for the innocent. Morgan accepted the praise on behalf of her crew, but made sure everyone knew the real heroes were the 17 who didn't come home. Their sacrifice had saved 30,000 lives. That was what mattered. Danny returned to Texas to recover from his injuries. His hometown threw a parade. He stood on a stage, uncomfortable with attention. When someone asked if he was scared during the battle, Danny answered honestly. He'd been terrified. But fear didn't matter when people needed help. You pushed through fear and did what needed to be done. A young boy asked why he'd fought for people he didn't know. Danny knelt to the boy's level and explained that humans had always been this way. Throughout their history, there had always been people willing to risk everything to protect others. It was part of who they were as a species. The boy asked if Danny would do it again. Danny smiled and nodded. Every single time someone needed help, he'd be there. At the Galactic Council headquarters, the political landscape was shifting. Humanity's victory had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Species that had been neutral or hostile suddenly wanted diplomatic relations. But more importantly, the innocent species had a new protector. The Lyrians spread the story to anyone who would listen. Other species that had suffered under the Croth began reaching out to Earth, asking for help, for protection, for hope. The Croth Dominion was in chaos. Draxus had returned home in disgrace. His defeat had shaken their entire military structure. For the first time in their history, they'd encountered a species more dangerous than themselves. Some Croth leaders wanted revenge, but wiser voices prevailed. The humans had shown mercy to captured warriors, treated prisoners with dignity, fought fiercely but fairly. Draxus himself spoke before the Croth War Council. He described humans not as enemies to be destroyed, but as warriors to be respected. Told them about Marines who died protecting Lyrian children, about doctors who healed enemy wounded, about a species that measured strength not by what they could take, but by what they could protect. The Croth had spent centuries believing might made right. Humanity had shown them a different path. On Exodus 7, the colony was rebuilding. Human engineers stayed to help repair damage. Marines trained Lyrian security forces. Teachers shared knowledge and technology. Elder Tomlos walked through the colony, watching his people laugh and sing again. Children played in streets. Artists painted murals depicting the battle, human ships descending like avenging angels. The Lyrians built a monument in their capital. It showed a human Marine holding a Lyrian child, surrounded by the names of the 17 who died saving them. The inscription read simply, **, they came when no one else would. **. Captain Morgan stood on the observation deck of the repaired Valiant Dawn, looking at Earth below. The planet was beautiful, a harsh world by galactic standards, a death world that shaped humanity into what they were. Commander Powell asked if she had any regrets. Morgan shook her head. They'd saved 30,000 lives. 17 humans died, but their sacrifice had meaning. They'd shown the galaxy what humanity stood for. Powell mentioned that dozens of distress calls were coming in from across the galaxy. Species victimized by pirates, raiders, oppressors, all asking specifically for humans. The Death Worlders who wouldn't quit. Morgan smiled. The Terran Defense Fleet would need to expand. More ships. More crews. More warriors willing to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Admiral Harrison issued a statement to Earth. Explained that their role in the galaxy was changing. They were no longer just another species trying to find their place. They were protectors now. Defenders of the innocent. Warriors for those who had no warriors of their own. He called for volunteers. The response was overwhelming. Millions applied to serve. They wanted to be part of something larger. They wanted to make a difference. Training facilities were built. New ships constructed. Marines, pilots, engineers, medics prepared for missions across the galaxy. Humanity was mobilizing not for conquest but for protection. The distress call from Exodus 7 stopped broadcasting. It was replaced by a new message that spread through every communication network in the galaxy. And throughout the galaxy, species both innocent and cruel began to understand what that meant. When someone called for help, humanity would answer. When someone threatened the innocent, humanity would respond. When someone thought they could prey on the weak without consequence, they would learn about the Death Worlders from Earth. On the bridge of the Valiant Dawn, Morgan received notification of their next mission. Another distress call. Another species in trouble. Another chance to make a difference. She called her crew to battle stations. The ship turned away from Earth and accelerated toward the jump point. There were people out there who needed help, and humanity had never been good at walking away from people in trouble. As the Valiant Dawn vanished into slipspace, a transmission was sent back to Earth. 3 simple words that would become humanity's motto. Their promise to the galaxy: we are coming.